Talk a little bit about vision, barriers to achieving the vision, what some of the responses and models are for addressing the situation that we're in. And so as the work that I do, I really travel throughout the country. NAACP has 1,200 branches and chapters throughout the country. And I travel throughout the country meeting with communities to help communities to put together action plans for addressing, for becoming more sustainable and for engaging in policy change at the local, state, and national level. So when I have these conversations with folks, we start off with a real kind of visioning conversation. Oops. Okay. And so when we have these visioning conversations, we start by kind of getting grounded in what we actually want for our communities. One of the things with the NAACP is that it's kind of known more for what it's against than what it's for. There's all, whenever I check into a hotel and I say I'm with the NAACP, they're like, "What are you marching on?" Well, nothing. We don't really do that much nowadays. And so we really are wanting to talk about. And unfortunately, one of the reasons that we're known more for what we're against is because the communities and the constituencies we serve are so much under attack by the various systems and issues and so forth. So there hasn't really been the luxury to be able to actually talk about a vision because people have just been focused on survival and basic rights. But now, with the Environmental and Climate Justice Program, we recognize that we really do have to talk vision in order to get to where we need to be. So we start this conversation really talking about vision, and these are some of the common themes that arise from those conversations with the branches. So clean air, water, land, healthy residents, good educational systems, which is actually something that comes up probably more than anything else in terms of really people wanting to have better resources for their youth. Economic opportunities is also one that comes up quite a bit. And opportunity for their cultures to thrive, abundant and healthy foods. A lot of the communities I work in are in food deserts where the only food they have access to is fairly unnutritious food. Safety, obviously in a number of communities there's crime issues, as well as just talking about national security issues. So safety is a big issue that comes up. And then just beauty. Again, when you're often just kind of dealing with these assaults on communities, the whole notion of actually having a place that's beautiful seems like a real luxury. And so, but we're kind of reaching the point where we want to think about beauty. And then just happiness, which is again one that people don't necessarily think about from the beginning when you talk about vision, like the basics in terms of just being able to be happy. Now in the social justice movements, they have this concept that we talk about called buen vivir, which is kind of like the good life. Like, is that even something that we can envision actually having a good life, not just again fighting against various assaults on communities. And so, as we talk about vision, just that we have been offered an opportunity in terms of the earth that we've been given in all of its bounty, and so it's not like this isn't an achievable vision in all of the riches that we have naturally and otherwise, that we should be able to achieve some level of happiness and access for all residents or all people and in the U.S. and beyond. Oops, I keep pushing this button. That's not the right button. Okay, and so then we as we have these visioning sessions, we talk about what are the threats to this vision, and different folks bring up different things depending on what community I'm in. So if I'm in a community like Mossville, Louisiana, or Pritchard, Alabama, where they're in kind of these toxic zones or chemical corridors, or then pollution comes up high. When I'm in the Gulf Coast or in some of these regions that have been assaulted multiple times by tornadoes, then disaster comes up. Everyone talks about under-resourced schools in a lot of the communities that I work in. A lack of economic opportunities is also a pretty consistent theme. People talk about unhealthy lifestyles and they tie it into kind of historical choices that people have had and haven't had, and where it kind of results in patterns of unhealthy lifestyles. They also talk about infrastructure, not having walkable areas and so forth that lead to a certain type of lifestyle and leads to various health outcomes that are not positive. Lack of neighborhood unity and cooperation. Some folks, we have these meetings, usually the people who come to the meetings are the ones who want to engage and get active, and then they talk about how we can't get anyone else to the table, and we can't do this alone, and we're working on X, we need more people at the table. And so they lament the lack of neighborhood cohesion. Crime is a major threat to the safety issue we talked about. And food deserts, people living in communities where they're more likely to have access to potato chips and Cheetos and Fritos and then, you know, kale or fruit or, you know, whatever. So, and then just non-people-centered development. People, you know, developments coming in, you know, whether it's a refinery or a factory or whatever, and not without care for the people that are in the community and how it's going to impact them. So these are some of the threats to those. And then just yet another scripture for us to reflect on in terms of if we aren't really being intentional about how we're using the natural resources, what impact it's going to have both on the earth itself and on us who rely on the earth's bounty, and we have this relationship that should be more harmonious. So, just a quote from Martin Luther King to keep us grounded. And so when we talk about, even in our different communities, we talk about we don't want to have kind of a very insular conversation about just what communities want for themselves. We want to recognize that communities are also connected to other communities. And really talk about, so whether even it's advocacy issues, we don't want to just focus on advocacy for the issues that are only affecting our community. We want to think about living in relationship with other communities as well. So this is a theme in the types of organizing that we do. So now we'll kind of get into the nitty-gritty. I was kind of setting the groundwork. So in terms of our analysis around where we are today in terms of this relationship with the earth that really focuses on profiteering and money for a wealthy few, while the rest of us are left scrabbling over what's left. This illustration kind of talks about the commodification of, or commoditization of our natural resources, as well as the commoditization of kind of cheap labor, all towards that end of profiteering. And then we also talk about the culture that has arisen in terms of excesses and consumerism and so forth, and how that also is driving our issues. And then how this is compounded when we have a society that needs to, where power is concentrated in very few, and it relies on commoditization of natural resources and cheap labor, then it means that someone needs to be oppressed in order for that to work functionally. And so these systems of oppression and these are some of the divisive ways that we have the oppressions that go on. So whether it's race, ethnicity, based on race, ethnicity, class, gender, country of origin, these are some of the issues that then start to divide us, unfortunately. So I just want to kind of focus, as the work that we focus on, as we look at our relationship with the environment, we focus on both kind of waste and how we consume and how we aren't really dealing with our waste in a positive way that, you know, recycles and conserves and so forth. And then we'll also talk about energy systems and our use of energy and how that is also resulting in climate change and how it also impacts communities that are host to the facilities that either manage waste or produce energy. So waste in our communities, we generate billions of tons of waste every year as a nation, and the waste unfortunately goes disproportionately into low-income communities and communities of color. So these are, I was noticing even as I was driving down 95 and then down the turnpike, the number of landfills that I passed on my way. So it's funny, before I started doing this work, I'd never really, you know, you just become hyper aware of seeing landfills and smelling landfills as you go through. This landfill is actually in Campbellton, Florida. It's the Spring Hill landfill, and it's the landfill that received the most waste from the BP oil drilling disaster. And it's the landfill that has the highest proportion of people of color in the community. And all the landfills, I don't think I included the slide that has kind of a graph of where the waste from the BP oil drilling disaster went. But without exception, it all went to communities that were a higher than average proportion of people of color in those communities. And we see how this gets impacted. This is a family called the Hope family in Dixon, Tennessee. And the landfill that was adjacent to their property actually ended up, the landfill liner eroded, and basically landfill liners aren't perpetual, and there's never a time when they kind of dig out all the landfill stuff and, you know, replace the liner. So eventually, the EPA even says this, that eventually landfill liners are always going to erode. It's just a matter of when, and then what happens as a result. In this case, the landfill liner eroded and got into the water supply. This family, the whole family, drank the water for years, and it was laced with trichloroethylene, and everyone in the family ended up with some rare form of cancer. There were a number of kids in the family who ended up with cleft palates. You don't even hear about cleft palates anymore, not to mention more than one in a concentrated community, and there are a number of kind of illnesses and birth defects that arose from this. And unfortunately, this isn't kind of an uncommon tale. There are landfills that are eroding across the country, and again, they're disproportionately located in communities that can do the least about it politically and economically, and have the least kind of cushion to deal with this kind of situation. Then we have just kind of our relationship in terms of consumerism. People talk about how China is, also generates all of the emissions, so many of the emissions that drive climate change. It actually is overtaking the U.S. in terms of being the #1 country in terms of emissions. But part of that is that they're manufacturing the stuff for our over-consumerism as the United States. And so it's a large reason why China's carbon footprint is so large. And this is a map usually the colors would be a little more stark, but you can kind of get a sense. Anyway, even though the United States is only 4% of the global population, it's 30% of the, between 1900 and 1999, now it's gone down to 25%, but of the global share of the greenhouse gases that drive climate change. So 4% of the population, now 25% of the emissions that drive climate change. So it just gives us a sense of the responsibility we share, we bear for advancing climate change. This is an incinerator, and so with the way we deal with waste, we either bury it or burn it, and whether we're burying it in landfills that affect communities, the landfills also generate methane, and methane is the #2 most impactful greenhouse gas that drives climate change, and incinerators also emit methane. They also emit cadmium, arsenic, lead, mercury, and other toxins as well. And they're also disproportionately located in communities of color and low-income communities. So then we look at our energy system. And so whether it's the oil refinery, this oil refinery is next to the Chavez High School in Houston, Texas. It's one of 5 oil refineries within a 10-mile radius of that school, because there's no zoning laws in Houston. And unfortunately, across the country, we have a number of schools that are right in this that have this type of scenario where they're right next to these toxic facilities without the regulations to protect them. Then we know in this region about the BP oil drilling disaster. This is a lawn sign that they did in Plaquemines Parish after the oil drilling disaster to really kind of cry out for justice after that. This was done in the dead of night on the wall of a BP gas station. Again, after the BP oil drilling disaster, I was impressed by their bravery in that. So, and then we have natural gas. So now, as we try to drive out coal and are actually being successful in that, we have this new threat that they consider to be a cleaner alternative, but in fact, we know that what they call hydraulic fracturing or fracking has its own set of harms. This is a map of the various, what they call fraccidents, or fracking incidents, or fracking accidents that have happened across the United States. And that's just kind of at a point in time. And this is a map of the types of impacts that we see from fracking. So whether it's the transportation of the water that they use in the hydraulic fracturing process that then emits various pollution from the use of the trucks and so forth, or it's the venting and flaring that releases greenhouse gases as well, or the impact on the water table that that gets into folks' water supplies, or now the geologists are looking at the tie between fracking and the increase in seismic activities. In fact, in Ohio, they've actually put a ban on fracking because they had such a significant increase in seismic activity, because they really want to kind of figure out what's going on before they allow that to continue in their communities. And if anyone here has seen Gasland, they've seen where people in these areas that are host to fracking have actually lit their water on fire when it comes out of their tap, because of the level of explosivity that the water has as a result of contamination from fracking. And then at the same time, we have this corporate relationship in terms of corporations. The Halliburton loophole refers to the fact that Halliburton actually lobbied to have fracking be exempt from the Safe Drinking Water Act, which to me is just unbelievable. Just the level of, it's just absolutely appalling. And so the fact that these companies just blatantly lobby for, again, non-people centered, just wanting to act with impunity in terms of polluting is just, I don't think I need to say much more about that. And then we have our nuclear industry. Folks have, of course, we've heard of Fukushima, and after Fukushima, these various maps came out. And I actually want to add one to this illustration. There's a map that shows all of the earthquake fault lines that we have in the United States and how many of the nuclear reactors are actually built on earthquake fault lines. But it's not only the nuclear reactors, but from cradle to grave, the whole nuclear process. So whether it's uranium mining on Native American or indigenous lands, or the improper disposal of the spent fuel rods, just from cradle to grave, that's obviously a dangerous practice. And then we have coal, again, cradle to grave. So whether it's black lung that affects the workers, whether it's the fact that so much of the coal mining does also happen on native lands as well, to the blasting off of mountains through mountaintop removal. These once beautiful vistas are now just completely defiled by this type of blasting, and that affects not only the beauty, but it also gets into the water streams in those areas, and in some areas, because again the explosivity of the mountaintop removal, people's the foundations of their homes are being damaged in fracking communities, and again, these are often communities that just can't afford to have these kinds of impacts, and then the companies aren't taking any responsibility for these things that are happening. And then there's the coal combustion. So we did a study called Cold-Blooded, Putting Profits Before People, a couple of years ago, looking at coal-fired power plants throughout the country, and found that 68% of African Americans live within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant. And African Americans are more likely to have lung disease, but less likely to smoke. African American children are 3 times as likely to enter into hospital from asthma attacks and twice as likely to die from asthma. And then when you tie it to the fact that we're ingesting these types of contaminants, you start to see the links. When we were coming in, one person was talking about this study that just came out this week, linking pollution to racism, and saying that even when you tease out for class, race is the highest correlation in terms of exposure to pollution. So, sorry. This is a Navajo family, and so it's not just African Americans that have those statistics, but Latino and indigenous families are also impacted as well. This is an area called Four Corners in Arizona. This family, and you can see better, there's actually smoke coming out of those smokestacks behind them. But that Navajo generating station is one of 4 coal-fired power plants within 30 miles of where this one family lives. In that family, you see there's no men in the family because the men have to actually go off and work in another state. When they bring in these coal plants, it's with promise of jobs and so forth. But often, those jobs don't necessarily come, or they bring in people as well as the plants, so the people who are living locally don't get those jobs. Also, you said the woman, she's rather elderly, but in a wheelchair, but another number of people in the family have respiratory illnesses. The woman in blue is pregnant, and we know that the various toxins that come from the plants often cause birth, also often affect birth outcomes. And then finally, this is a final point of injustice. You see those 2 coolers are on the porch. That's because they have water in them because they don't have running water, and they also don't have electricity. So the irony of living 4 coal-fired power plants within 30 miles, and they get all the negative in terms of these health impacts and so forth, but they don't even get the electricity from these plants. So those plants largely provide electricity for Las Vegas, Phoenix, Los Angeles, and so forth. So, again, just kind of pointing out these injustices. And then we have the low-income communities, communities of color, are in disproportionately subsistence fisher folks. And when you're disproportionately subsistence fisher folks and you live in communities that have poor air quality and also poor water quality, then when you're fishing out of these waters, it's yet another route for the poisons to enter into the bodies of the folks who live in these communities. When I was doing this presentation, one of the executive vice presidents of the NAACP talked about how when rent would become due and money would be low, he would go and fish out of the Hudson River in New York, until one day when he pulled his catch out and all the scales fell off the fish. So again, these are the kind of polluted waters people are fishing out of to put food on the table. So, and this is, you know, we talk about cradle to grave. This is the final kind of stage of this coal production process. This is an aerial view of the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority coal ash spill that happened in 2008. And as we know, there was also a recent coal ash spill that happened in North Carolina. So these coal ash impoundments don't have the proper regulations, and so they often have these spills. And a number of them are adjacent to lakes, and so they're just regularly running off into lakes. When I went and visited North Carolina to look at the Dan River coal spill that just happened in February, I went to an area where they had built up a coal ash pond, and because of the way the water is much warmer next to a coal plant because of the cooling water that they let off into the water, and so it brings a lot of fish to that area, but it's a coal ash pond. They actually built a fishing pier. So people, you know, the coal plant owners built a fishing pier on the coal ash pond. And so, you know, the waters are polluted with selenium, mercury, arsenic, lead, and they completely have a relationship with the regulator, so they don't even monitor for mercury, arsenic, and lead, but coal ash is known to contain mercury, arsenic, and lead. And so I took a picture there of the people who are fishing off of the fishing pier from a coal ash pond. I mean, it's just, you can't even make it up. I mean, it's just more horrible than any kind of fictional thing one can even devise. So, but I promise we're going to get to a positive part of this presentation. I mean, you know, but just for now, we just need to ground us in the realities of where we are, and then we do have a vision for a better day. And this is a house that was affected by the coal ash spill that happened in 2008. Tennessee Valley spill. It was a huge, massive spill of kind of violent type of impacts and proportions. So why are we in this place? As we talked about at the very beginning, this whole profits over people issue is a challenge. So recently they came out with a report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as folks heard a couple of weeks ago, and they really are pointing out that not only are we in a bad place in terms of the way we're producing energy and dealing with waste now, but even the solutions that we're trying to come up with are putting us, you know, aren't getting us where we need to be. So whether it's natural gas, some people are saying, you know, including natural gas in their renewable portfolio standards as an alternative fuel. And some people are putting nuclear and say, well, nuclear is definitely better than coal because it's not putting out greenhouse gas emissions. It's like, well, yeah, you'll die a slow death, but you'll just die instantly, you know, if anything happens with a nuclear facility. So the false solutions are even worse than where we are now in some ways. This is another quote from Martin Luther King that I thought captured that notion. All progress is precarious, and the solution of one problem brings us face to face with another problem. So again, this is an illustration of, if folks have heard of the Koch brothers, so they're, you know, billionaire brothers who are really fueling a lot of the industries that are getting us into where we are now. And the International Forum on Globalization put together this graphic called the Coctopus that, and it showed all the tentacles of their influence. So media manipulators, and how they fund think tanks, how they, congressional collaborators putting money into the pockets of Congress, putting money into the pockets of the courts so that the courts come out in certain ways, putting money into actual universities. Once when I was doing this presentation, one of the students came up to me at the university and said, you know, Koch brothers is a major funder of this very university, and we actually have a stealth campaign that we're implementing right now to get their money out of our university. So it's definitely pervasive. So, and so what are they trying to find? They're not only fueling these different industries, but they're actively fueling this campaign to deny the fact that the climate change is happening here and now, what the impacts are of it. So we have, you know, a rather grim illustration of the fact that, you know, that's how far we're getting this denial. So this is a list of some of the think tanks that are funded by the Koch brothers. This is just in 1 year, $52 million given to these think tanks. And this is you can't really read it, but there's the list of all the pro-Keystone XL pipeline mentions and kind of studies that they've come out with saying that the Keystone XL pipeline is actually good for us. And so that's a number of times that they've done that in their research that they're coming out with. And this is the Interfaith Moral Action on Climate Change. We were protesting in front of the American Petroleum Institute, and this is our message: API, it's immoral to wreck our planet with your dirty fossil fuel. And I don't know if folks heard that this week Archbishop Desmond Tutu came out and said that we needed an anti-apartheid-like boycott of fossil fuels across the globe. So we're really kind of unifying around this morality issue as it relates to our relationship with fossil fuels. This is some members of Interfaith Moral Action on Climate Change at a fracking rally in D.C. So, and again, just really talking about this unfortunate relationship between our law system, our policy-making system, and these special interests. Martin Luther King: law and order exists for the purpose of establishing justice, and when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. So this, to that point, is a list of just a fraction of the various Congress folks who are receiving money from the Koch brothers. And this is a list of their voting records in favor of the Keystone XL pipeline and the amounts of money that they've been given. So again, and recently, I don't know if you've heard, there's a court decision that kind of backed up or didn't restrain the fact that we continue to have a political system that's fueled by special interests. And so we're continuing with that, and that's one of the reasons why campaign finance reform is such an important conversation, to delink this relationship. And given that our policymakers, our decision makers are supposed to be shepherds of our well-being, and they're supposed to be representing us, I thought this was a good scripture to refer to the fact that they're not properly taking care, and it has resulted in particularly harsh impacts on what they call the least of these, or people who have the least ability to be able to be cushioned against these impacts. So just a little bit of a, hopefully will be a humorous interlude here. So this is actually a video that kind of calls out some of the deniers of climate change and kind of in a creative way. So hopefully we'll enjoy it.
Let's see. If not, we'll run it on the CD.
Okay. Oh, that's actually the.
Oh, okay. Let's see.
Okay.
Let's see. I make no promises for the Wi-Fi in here.
Okay.
Keep your fingers crossed, otherwise. All right. Your fingers have more power than mine do. This never works for me. It's only working for you.
I think you have to click, do you want me to? I think you have to click the other one off, the one to the right. I think you have to, yeah, oh. Yeah, but because of him, I think you have to actually exit out, yeah, so that's X, yeah. And then can you enlarge the whole thing? Oh. You could play it from the file. You want to do that? The file that I gave you?
I don't know why, because it didn't keep showing.
It might be just, yeah. positive packing. So they can kind of cool.
The arrow, right?
Yeah, the arrow.
To the left.
Yeah. That arrow that's right above climate, that little, yeah.
Andrew, Sandy, Ivan, Katrina. Since 1954, the World Meteorological Organization has been naming hurricanes and tropical storms. But what did these people do to deserve having their names attached to this? As climate change continues to create more frequent and devastating storms, we propose a new naming system. One that names extreme storms after policymakers who deny climate change. We propose something like this.
Senator Marco Rubio is expected to pound the eastern seaboard sometime early tonight. Windows are being boarded up and grocery stores are virtually empty as Marco Rubio threatens everything in his path.
Now, Michelle Bachmann is on the way, folks, and specifically the eye of Michelle Bachmann will be hitting Florida in a few hours.
Coverage on Michelle Bachmann is incredibly dangerous. If you value your life, please seek shelter from Michelle Bachmann.
Senator David Vitter is turning out to be one of the hugest and costliest disasters in American history.
David Vitter is literally lifting boats out of the water and tossing them onto the land.
In New Orleans, the levees that were built to stop Hurricane Colin Peterson have been obliterated. And here's the north here where Speaker John Boehner is really getting a number on this coastline. John Boehner is just destroying this town.
Local animal shelters are under pressure as thousands of animals have been displaced or killed by Governor Rick Perry.
We can't even take care of the animals that we've rescued, and so some of them are going to have to be put down, all because of Rick Perry.
We've been here for 2 days because of Congressman Paul Ryan. I have friends still out there. It's scary because I have no idea what Paul Ryan could be doing to them right now.
Senator James Inhofe has turned out to be a worst-case scenario come true, and now an entire nation is wondering how they'll ever recover from the disaster that is James Inhofe.
If you agree that it's time for a naming system that names extreme storms caused by climate change after policymakers who deny climate change, sign the petition at climatenamechange.org before John Boehner blows your entire city away.
So yes, it basically, obviously, it tells its own story. So as we go forward, we really are looking at the fact that, you know, these different corporations are unduly influencing our politicians so that they are doing things like denying something that 97% of the scientists are saying is actually happening. So, and these are the types of these are the types of anti-regulatory lobbying investments that they're making. Meanwhile, they're raising ratepayer rates while they spend millions of dollars on anti-regulatory, anti-clean energy lobbying investments, not to mention fueling all of the money into the think tanks to come up with bogus science to say climate change doesn't exist or the Keystone XL pipeline is good. And then these are the types of profits that they're trying to protect in terms of the CEO compensation that these various companies are getting. So upwards of $16 million for Dominion Energy, and so forth. So the average CEO compensation is about $9.8 million. The average worker makes $33,840. So the average CEO compensation is 289 times the rate of the average worker. So again, these are the types of profits that folks are trying to preserve. And then we have the impacts of this type of policy making and this relationship between money and decision making, and the impacts of the threats to our human and civil rights. I don't think I have to go through them, but as we talk about these impacts, we'll see each and every one of the human and civil rights are being impacted by climate change. So whether it shifts in agricultural yields, land that was once fertile, drying up like pavements in the U.S. and beyond. We have communities where they're already, we have food deserts where people are more likely to get their food from a place like the corner store than a grocery store, or certainly not a farmer's market. And then when you have the corner store as your main source of diet, that means you have a diet heavy in sugars and preservatives and sodium, all the things that not only don't preserve our health, but they actually damage our health. So we have communities that are already exposed to toxins, and then on top of it, these are the types of diets that they're subjected to with no access to the fortifying foods that actually give us, wellness and longevity and so forth. And then we have sea level rise. We have a place like, this is the Maldives Island, where now already they have a seawall built up around the island, but within 20 years, they're going to be underwater. And so they actually are talking with places like Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, about relocating their entire island and all of its residents. And they actually had, in 2009, their cabinet meeting for their government underwater to illustrate internally and to the world that this is where they're going to be in 20 years. It's not, it's a reality. So, and then it's not just happening there. Here in the United States, on the left is Kivalina Island, the Inuit community there, and on the right, very blurry, is Thibodaux, Louisiana. Both of these, within 20 years, are going to be underwater. Thibodaux is already losing a football field of land every week in terms of land mass because of not only the sea level rise, but also the land is sinking because of the level of drilling that happens in that area. And oh, thank you. Give me a little 15-minute warning. Thank you. So I'm going to start talking like an auctioneer now because and then we have extreme weather events. So hurricanes, tornadoes, although still out the extent to which these increases in tornadoes and frequency and severity is necessarily tied to climate change, but one of those things people are still looking into. And then we have various communities that are differentially impacted, either because political power. One example I talk about is when I was in Louisiana a couple of years ago, the levee system in Plaquemines Parish, which is a poor community that's like fisher folks and oystermen and so forth, that the levees weren't built up there as opposed to them being built up in New Orleans. And CNN's Suzanne Malveaux asked Senator Mary Landrieu why the levees weren't built up in Plaquemines Parish. And she said, yes, I asked the Army Corps of Engineers that same question, after I saw how devastated Plaquemines Parish was, once again after it had been devastated already by Katrina. And they said that all the different communities are assigned points to say whether they'll be prioritized in terms of building up the levees, and the points are put into a formula, and the points are based purely on economic impact. So it doesn't matter how many people are living there, who the people are, anything like that. It just matters what the economic impact is in terms of where they're going to build these levees. So it just gives a sense of that relationship and who's making that decision, who put together that formula, like how did that get decided. So the lack of engagement and the lack of political power of certain communities then results in these kind of decisions being made. Then that ties into community infrastructure, economic status, people who are underinsured, those types of impacts, having poor housing stock, number of communities whose homes are in floodplains because that's all that they can afford, people with pre-existing health conditions, people with various immigration statuses anyway, are impacted because of non-help seeking behavior. If you have different immigration status, you might not necessarily go into a disaster recovery center for fear of reprisals. Also, even in the aftermath of the BP oil drilling disaster, there were crews that were going to help to do cleanup, but because some of the residents were feeling resentful, because those crews were people from other countries, they actually called an ICE raid on those crews because of resentment, because they felt like those jobs should be going to the local community. So it shows how immigration status. There are various gender differentials. Women, there's always a spike in sexual violence and domestic violence in the aftermath and during and after disasters. If you look up the earthquake in Gujarat, the earthquake in Haiti, Hurricane Katrina, and so BP oil drilling disaster, each and every one of these illustrated there's a spike in violence against women after disasters. ableism, people with different abilities and their ability to survive after disasters is much more compromised. And then people with differential language access also have a challenge because during disaster, people aren't thinking about, the multiple languages that things need to be in. It's always in the dominant language until there's time to kind of really pull it together. So again, it's an illustration of poor housing stock and how it impacts people. This is an illustration of the intersection between the disproportionate exposure to toxic facilities in some communities and disasters. This is Port Gibson, Mississippi, which is a poor African American community that happens to be host of a nuclear power plant. There's only one road in and out of that community. The nuclear power plant was in jeopardy of being breached during the flooding of 2011, and the community was in great fear of what was going to happen to them if it did get breached, because there was no way for them to all get out, because they also had multiple mobility issues, because people didn't have cars and so forth, and with the one road in and out, even that would have been a problem. One thing that struck me when I was there is that when I went in, I just noticed that the church, I visited one church that was doing sheltering, but they said they couldn't get any help from the Red Cross to do sheltering, and they, as a practice, do sheltering services. And then I also found the Red Cross folks in front of City Hall, and they were just there like at a table with 2 chairs, wearing their little Red Cross vest, and usually they have a whole disaster recovery center for a place that's severely impacted as this. So we asked what was, why the disparity and how they were, what kind of services. And they said because they were not allowed to set up like a full-scale services within 7 miles of a nuclear facility.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, again, with the mobility issues and the impact there, we all know the stories of the buses that went sitting, of the blocked roads where people couldn't get out, and of these kind of, dire situations of evacuation that resulted. Similarly, these kind of people who were more impacted, elderly people, poor people, etc., low-income folks. This is a picture of the aftermath of the tornadoes in Alabama, and it just struck me when I was in this gymnasium where they were giving out food, is that down to a person, everyone who was receiving the food was African American, and down to a person, everyone who was giving out the food was white. And it just struck me in terms of who was able to bounce back, who was most impacted, and so forth. And then similarly, when I saw who was on stage at the town hall meeting, everyone who was giving the information, who had access to the resources, who were in positions of decision making, was not only white but male as well. That struck me. And then lined up at the mic, the people who needed the services, who needed information, 3 African American women in this particular case. And then just the images of destruction and who's going to be able to bounce back from this. This is a family who had 8 months before had moved out to this dream house that they had been saving up for, and this is what happened to it. And they weren't able to, between FEMA and their underinsurance, they weren't able to build back, so their lives were, this dream that they'd had for all their lives was just no more, and they just moved back to an apartment, and that's where they're going to live out the rest of their days. So a little bit of a musical interlude for us, hopefully. This is the CD.
Yeah, let me just play on the CD.
Okay, awesome.
Fiddling with the YouTube.
Okay. Thanks. So this is actually a high school class that is it's a class, a second chance class for kids who are having problems with the regular school system. They're environmental class, and they were kind of telling the story of a lot of the themes that we talked about today. So I just wanted the youth voice to be with us in the room. So hopefully. Yeah. Yes.
Is there a plan of action that you might be leading?
Yes.
Control, we need to take control of this climate. We need to take control. We need to take control. We need to take control of this climate.
It's getting hot, yeah, it's heating up. The climate changing, how it's affecting us. You mean the floods, storms, droughts, and fires, and heat-related deaths in the U.S. is getting higher. Now who worries? You worry, so what you doing? Neighborhoods affected by all this air pollution, and it's amusing, it's a problem and solution. Decrease your carbon footprint, it's really not hard to do. I've been going crazy as a little kid, in my hood, the heat is killing kids. I speak for the climate, yeah, I'm the Earth's ventriloquist. Those heat waves, I know you feeling it. Stop burning that coal, use propane when you grilling it, cause it can harm your respiratory. Ask these politicians for change, they ain't doing nothing for me. They pollute around my area, cause we ain't in the category. We need to take control of this climate, ladder to prosperity. I'm ready to climb it. This country's morals lost, somebody help me find it. Our eco-death certificate, they please try to decline it. It's getting hot, yeah, it's heating up.
Okay, thank you. So, so as you see, they talk about some of the things, and they also start to get at the action. The reason why we're acting back, protesting, lobbying, and so that's one of the things in our action plan. So now good timing, because we are at this point where we're going to talk about kind of the other way that we need to be thinking about in terms of changing systems instead of changing our climate. So this is a quote from Martin Palmer, Secretary General of the Alliance of Religions and Conservation. We believe that the key contribution of religions can make is to develop programs that will deliver responses based not on fear, guilt, or apprehension, but because they are true to what the faith understands. So the types of things that we're working on are really localized approaches as well as looking at policy change at a broader level. So we're going into communities and really talking about the vision that we talked about at the very beginning. So as I said before, one of the major issues that people brought up, particularly in the Gulf region, was schools. And so as we talk about kind of building more sustainable systems, we also need to look at, and as we build kind of a holistic vision, we need to look at how we don't want to have a myopic focus on only environmental programs that don't benefit the other issues that people bring up in terms of their vision. So so green schools, whether it's weatherization or putting clean energy into green schools, we actually talk to folks about how we find that that when you implement a green school model, that attendance improves, school scores, various scores improve, and so forth. And then there's also savings in terms of energy efficiency that they get reinvested back into the school system. And part of the mechanism there is that everyone is coming together to figure out how they want to have a better school, so that feeling of increased value that the students feel then translates into better performance in school and better attendance and participation in school because they feel valued and the whole system feels like they're working together. Then we also talk about the waste systems. We can, by establishing a 75% waste diversion, we can create 1.5 million jobs and lower greenhouse gas emissions by 515 million tons, which is the equivalent of 72 coal plants or 15 million cars. And so we're really looking city by city and implementing zero waste initiatives that not only reduce the amount of waste that we're putting out, but it also creates jobs in communities that have the economic deprivation. So as I said before, the economic opportunities was a major issue that people raised in our vision.